Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 339, an essay on demonology, ghosts, and apparitions, and popular superstitions. But I couldn't put that part in the title, it's too long. Link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links to my books, blogs. Of course, I'll be blogging about that later as usual. And I'll probably go into the academic section because it is a skeptical and rational work. This is an essay refuting some of these superstitions. It, though unwittingly, provides a huge amount of resources for those who are involved with the occult, especially the historical side. 132 pages, so it's an intermediate read. Of course, remember, a lot of works from this period, they're essentially double-spaced, so when you reformat them, they get a lot shorter, even though all the material's still there. Now, the plethora of material here is rather large. The first section deals with some notorious cases of people who believe that they were demon-possessed, they were bewitched, ghosts were troubling them, their health problems were caused by witchcraft, and so forth. And it goes through to refute these, but they're really interesting historical tales. There's some notable people in history that have had problems related to delusions in some cases, drug use, alcohol abuse as well, causing delirium tremens and other problems, seeing weird specters and shit like that. It goes through some of the vulgar folk beliefs, because of course this sort of predates most of the attempts to compile vulgar or common man's folklore in any serious historical sense. I think that the longest section here, and the most important though, is really about the burning times in the Salem witch trials. And some of the trial transcripts are given verbatim. And if you go through, you can definitely see a little bit of an overlap with the question and answer sort of format there, and how people are persecuted now. Not for witchcraft as much anymore. Now it's for political verboten opinions and things of that nature. I think anything that regards persecution is in the contemporary sense, rather important. You got to understand as well, though, there's another section, and this one was the most interesting to me personally. It's shorter than the witchcraft section, but it's still important. And that has to do with medical quackery. This is a subject that I'm increasingly fascinated by. And so you have like the folk beliefs and stuff. And again, in the contemporary sense, medical quackery also important. Now, here's an interesting aside. This particular work says, well, some of these compounds these quacks are giving out, they would dilute them heavily. Homeopathy, of course, in the early stage, Thomsonian medicine with medical simples and stuff. They're giving people cures that don't work. But this same exact document, of course, from the 19th century, also says that taking physic, that is bloodletting, is medically effective. And at one point, I can't remember in the context, is like, well, this person refused to call the normal physician. He was relying upon medical quacks to give him probably lobelia or laudanum or something at that point. And he kept getting worse, and if he had only called for the physician a little bit sooner, bloodletting would have saved his life. And I thought that was fascinating because, of course, we still have to deal with a great deal of medical quackery right now. Just because it is accepted by rational or scientific minds, historically speaking, doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually useful. In fact, if you look at the history of medicine, most of that history is failure. The very large proportion of it. Really, the biggest successes in the pre-modern period, up until sulfa drugs and standardization and things that come in the 50s and 60s, basically, the atomic era. Up until then, herbal medicine was basically king because some of those herbs were actually medically active. You know, like licking willow bark. Okay, there's your aspirin for the day. Lobelia, it is chemically active, although it's not a cure-all. And so I find this fascinating. Dietary, of course, fits in with that as well, although their idea of dietary science in the 19th century was definitely quite interesting and not exactly up to modern standards of what is or is not healthy, but jury's still out because I remember 20 years ago eggs were considered the devil. Now they're considered an important potential source of protein and extremely healthy for you. I can remember when fish was going to give you mercury poisoning. Now the omega-3 fatty acids in it will probably help you with heart disease. So keeping that in mind, one of the reasons why I looked at this work and I was so enthused to release it actually was because of that. The fact that there is such contemporary importance to persecution and medical quackery, and how looking at a work, the author considers himself rational, a medical doctor, very scientific, and yet is proposing things as opposed to what he considered quackery or persecution that were considered rational, liberal, and enlightened at the time. we have the exact same thing going on today. As far as the ghosts and spirits side of it, you've got to understand that the author was also religious, a religious Christian, but at the same time making arguments against what had been in vogue prior to the Enlightenment especially, but prior to the mid-1800s especially, when this was written, the 1830s, if I remember correctly. Literally that, well, Jesus isn't going to allow all this witchcraft and demonology, hoodoo, this is bullshit. They were just persecuting people for political purposes. That's in one interpretation of the situation. Of course, it's been partially supplanted by the erga theory, by the witch theory. There was actually witchcraft going on, but it was actually just folk medicine and stuff, and they were killing off all the wise women, and they ignore all the men, unfortunately, in that feminist reprisal of the Salem witch trials, of course. But I find it fascinating. It's as much a piece of history as it is a piece of lore and occult sort of material. But it comes, I would highly recommend this work, especially for its treatment of persecution, its treatment of the evolution of medicine over time, and for some of these really, really fascinating, kind of spooky and bizarre stories in some cases of bizarre things happening and people having what they could call paranormal experiences that are explained away here from a rationalistic perspective while still technically being in the mainline Orthodox Christian sense very accepted at the time. So again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon, second and third links to my books, blogs, again, highly recommended. Kind of a quasi-academic work, although again, as I said, as time marches along, what is considered orthodox in the scientific sense even a half a century ago often later on is completely discredited. That's about all. Peace out.